I get a call from a client and they say that they've been sued. They say, no, this guy or gal was the worst employee ever. We had to fire them. Okay, send me over the personnel file. It's pretty much empty. There's no documentation. How do we build a defense off of that? If lawyers can start to find tools that integrate them more closely with their clients and those clients' operations, that is where people can look to really make inroads with AI and really differentiate themselves. I really don't need my manager at 11 o'clock at night misinterpreting the meal break law because they're pulling something from California they thought was Connecticut. Go be a server or go wash dishes. If you can do a little bit of grunt work in that industry when you're young, I think you can come into the practice with more experience and appreciation for the area that you want to work in, and you're more conversant.
This is the Litigator's Edge, the podcast where smart strategy, practical innovation, and real-world experience come together to move litigation forward. Each week, we sit down with attorneys, legal tech leaders, and trusted advisors who are rethinking how great legal work gets done. You'll hear how law firms are building a competitive advantage. These conversations are grounded, insightful, and designed to help you refine how you work and how you win. Here is your host, Aniket Sawant.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Litigator's Edge, the podcast where innovative attorneys reveal the strategies that have transformed their legal practice. My name is Aniket Sawant, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Threadio. My guest today is a trusted legal advisor who has become a central figure in the hospitality industry. What makes his perspective so rare is that he operates from three distinct chairs. First, as chair of the hospitality practice at Pullman & Comley. Second, as in-house chief legal officer for a hospitality group. And third, as an entrepreneur and co-founder of his own startup. It's my pleasure to welcome Ryan O'Donnell to the podcast. Welcome, Ryan, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Ryan, I like to start each episode by essentially asking each of my guests to either share a fun fact about themselves or a cringe joke. Which will it be for you, and what is it?
We're going to go with a fun fact. I tried the cringe jokes. I bounced a few off my kids and my dogs, and I didn't get much of a response. In fact, they begged me not to. So I figured I would just stick with the fun fact. Fun fact is I actually had a commercially published science fiction novel that I had to adopt a pen name for because I was working as a young lawyer at the time, and the book had some risky scenes, right? And this was 2010. It was 2012, something like that. The world was not as accepting of adult content, especially in the professional industry and all that. I had to actually adopt a pen name because the partners reviewed the copy and said that I couldn't publish it under my name. So that's my fun fact. It was just a regular science fiction book, but a little bit of risque content, but nothing crazy. So that was a hat I wore in a previous life, and I thought it was funny that I can't imagine a law firm today putting those same kind of demands on a newer attorney, especially one where they could sort of promote off the back of it. But no, I had to have a pen name. So
that's amazing. That has to be up there in terms of one of the most interesting facts I've ever heard about an attorney. That's awesome. I thought that the startup, which we'll get into, was interesting enough, but yeah, science fiction pen name is a whole new league. That's fantastic. Do you do any writing on the side in all your quote unquote free time? Or
yeah, well, right. I mean, free time being the issue, but I mean, really, what happened was, the publishing industry changed very rapidly. When I was a kid, you go to like the Caldors or CVS, the drugstore, and you see those fire racks of mid-level paperbacks, right? Not War and Peace, but decent enough writers, and you could make a living off of that. And a lot of the folks I admired growing up did that, and then things change so rapidly with nobody reads anymore, but self-publishing, and everyone's got a blog and everyone's got social media, and they're really putting their writing into that. If you have a platform, you can sell books, right? If you don't have a platform, it's much more difficult. And that kind of mid-level writer in the paperback wire section, I don't think they exist anymore. So I kind of moved away from that. It wasn't just commercial, but you do have to support yourself in some capacities. That road seemed much harder. I do plan to do some more writing, as I get older, but for the time being, I think my plate's pretty full.
That's fantastic. Yeah, maybe we'll revisit in a decade or so and see see where you are with your writing interests. That's very cool. Going from the future into the past. So I really do think of every attorney who makes the time to be on this podcast as a superhero, and every superhero has an origin story. And so, what's yours?
What is my origin story? Well, my origin story was, I started off at a 10, 12 person labor employment firm in Hartford called Siegel O'Connor. And, it was a very interesting place. They practiced law they really worked hard to engage with clients and to separate themselves from the bigger firms by having really super high expectations for lawyers and their client interactions. And so I guess the superpower is that I was sort of, and this was the same for all associates there, it wasn't necessarily just me, but I was sent out to clients basically from day one. There was no sit in the back and catch up. There was no go to the library. There was no read these briefs. It was, no, you're going to go out and you're going to meet these clients and you're going to give lectures and talks, and you're going to go to trade associations, even small state, regional trade associations, stuff like that. And you're going to go out there and talk and represent the firm and engage with clients. So as far as superpowers go, sort of being forced into that. I mean, and as a first year, you're absolutely, terrified of like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know these people. They're strangers. But to have to go out and engage with them and be prepared to engage with these folks, and to get to know them very early in my career, was a huge advantage, right? I think too many younger attorneys are kind of held back from the fray, for some good reasons. And I'm sure it wasn't always the best idea to have a brand new attorney out and about talking about things they might not have a mastery of yet. But big picture, it really worked out well for me because I got very comfortable working with clients and understanding clients from a very young age, as at least young as an attorney age. So I think that sort of being thrown to the wolves like that, wound up, you have to sort of develop this ways to sort of survive and thrive in that. And I guess that would be my superpower.
That's incredible. I would also say kudos to you for rolling with that and sort of making the most of the situation, or taking the best advantage of the situation that you could, because it could go both ways. It could go really well or not so well, depending on the temperament that one shows. Sure. So that's cool. And then also, props to the law firm for, placing the bet, not on you, but on anyone in that position. And that really shows a strength of character in terms of wanting to build their attorney base and things. So
no, it was unique, and it was a way to show faith and trust in your young associates and make them sort of buy in faster, because I think they start to view them not just as senior partners clients, but as the firm's clients and even as their clients to some extent. So I think from the headspace that puts young attorneys in, really terrific way of doing things.
Yep, absolutely. Can we dial it back a little bit? So you started, you started your narrative with being in the law firm, but what led you to think about becoming an attorney by practice and training, and then of course all the other threads that you have currently going on? What's the genesis of that from maybe earlier in your childhood?
Sure. Well, I come from a family of lawyers, and I met my wife at law school, and at law school I still wasn't sure that I wanted to practice. I was interested in the law, and I was very interested in labor employment law. My dad was a labor employment attorney, but I wanted to do it in a different way, right? I didn't want to just do the same way my dad had done it, and everyone's got issues with that kind of stuff. But I wanted to really forge my own path, still respecting the work my dad had done and kind of his legacy. And so I was always interested, and I would kind of go and hang around with him sometimes when I was in college and watch him do his job and try to understand how he was doing it and what made him successful. And I found a nice connection there with the hospitality industry. I always liked going out to restaurants and entertainment and bars and the whole excitement and the vibrancy of that world. And some of those guys, they have very fascinating ways of doing things. A lot of them are they're artists, they're creators, and they like to build things. And I was really called to kind of protecting that because I really respect and love what they do. And it's much more hands-on. It's much more in the trenches, understanding the issues that they're facing at a very basic level. And that I found very attractive, right? Really working closely with people.
Very cool. So, keeping those interests in mind, and now can we talk a little bit about your trajectory from being that early associate in
Sure.
that law firm to where you are today from strictly your legal practice perspective? And then we have a couple of other threads to pull at.
Sure, of course. We spent more and more time working with hospitality clients. I moved on to a national firm before really finding my spot here at Pullman Comley. Pullman is tremendous. They were able to kind of take the hospitality work I was doing, which was labor employment focused, and then really expand it to bring in commercial real estate for hospitality and bring in corporate finance side for hospitality and bring in the mergers and acquisitions side of hospitality. So really grateful to have landed at a place like a Pullman, and that kind of freed me up to also lead a department. And we started getting involved in some class action defense work. Hospitality world has a lot of issues with class action lawsuits. My team and I worked with the legislature on some issues. I do a lot of work with the Connecticut Restaurant Association, and we helped kind of guide the whole industry in the state towards some regulatory fixes that were lacking. Right? There's all kinds of strange laws in not just in Connecticut, but even at the federal level that affect hospitality. You've got the tip credit, you've got overtime issues, lots of really unique stuff to hospitality, and so kind of developing a mastery of which is funny because I'm terrible at math. I'm like the worst mathematician, but to be in like a wage and hour space, right? And being so bad with numbers, but I tell you what, hospitality folks are even worse with them. So to really find a way to guide them through that has kind of been my team's trademark of getting down there at the basic level in their restaurants. Right? Like we're talking about going into restaurants, talking to managers, talking to employees, understanding what the problems are at the restaurants, right? At that real gut level, and then bringing those back into the solutions that we craft for our clients. That's been one thing that's really kind of pushed me to the next level, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. So Ryan, can you maybe share a specific example in obviously without going into names and details and things like that of a particularly challenging matter that you dealt with that actually shaped how you advise the industry and that helped you take your practice to the next level, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. We had a series of class actions about 5 or 6 years ago that we spent a lot of time defending, and a lot of them revolved around the tip credit. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the concept of tip credit for hospitality. It's you pay them a lower than mandatory minimum wage, but at the end of the week they have to have been caught up to the minimum wage with the use of gratuity. So they're always being paid the minimum wage. And there were some issues in Connecticut as to the law was very unclear as what duties could or could not be performed as part of that role that got paid the tip credit. So, we were ultimately successful in our argument that the work that was being performed was tip credit work. And we even were able to explain to the legislature that, hey, we really need some clarification, right? We've been successful legally, but we also need to provide better guidance for our restaurants and our businesses in the state. The Department of Labor wound up publishing some additional guidance that we think has been really, really helpful to not just our clients, but to the entire industry going forward when they're looking at the tip credit issue and trying to figure out, am I paying these folks correctly? Is the work that they're performing tip credit work? Even talking about it here, I'm like, man, that sounds really boring. But I mean, at the time, it was very exciting because it was a real problem, and it was really an existential problem for our clients. The profit margins in hospitality are so narrow, right? And the government has set up and approved of this pay system. Nobody ever gets paid below the minimum wage, but there was so little, understanding about where the lines were, right? And so to be able to really help through the courts and through the Department of Labor, the legislative system, right, really to help clarify those. I think that's really helped me push myself further along in my practice. It helped establish myself and my team as, I don't want to say subject matter experts in this, but at least the folks, if you have a question about wage and hour and hospitality, you can come talk to us. So it was just really, and then ultimately your clients then look at you and say, these are folks who understand our issues so well that they helped clarify it at a state level. And I think that was really important in terms of the client trust factor and the clients recognizing that they can talk to you about complex issues and hopefully get the right answer.
Makes sense. Yeah, I don't think it's boring at all, because I think it's fascinating that such a nuanced topic can have such implications for all sides, right? And so getting it right, or getting to something that everybody agrees on, or is clear to everybody, is extremely important. So thank you for
That's
sharing.
no, you're absolutely right. And I think I used the word existential, and that's really what it was. These folks were, if they were doing things wrong, it would have been millions of dollars in potential damages, but only if you're looking at these cases through a very narrow technical lens. When you actually pull back and say, well, what are we trying to accomplish here, right? Legally, what are we trying to do here? And that's not to, create a hyper technical regulatory system, but a fair system, right? And just I don't think anybody had looked at these laws in like 20 years, right? So I'm very proud of our team and our work there.
That's cool. So, in addition to your own legal practice, which I understand focuses on labor and employment within the hospitality industry, but you're also
Yep.
the chair of the overall hospitality practice at Pullman Company, right? And so, what are some of you briefly touched upon this, but what are some of the other areas that fall under your overall,
Sure.
oversight?
Lots of commercial real estate, right? And it's funny because we've tried to set ourselves apart from, a lot of restaurant groups. They've got their labor and employment guy or gal over here. They got the commercial guy over here. They got the corporate guy over here. But the problem is with that is that no one's talking to each other, right? And when you kind of bring everybody in and there's a centralized hub and then there's kind of spokes around the wheel, you can create much more holistic solutions, where left hand is actually talking to the right hand. And you can say, okay, if we're going to do this over here, it's going to, in on the commercial side, and it's going to impact our taxes over here, and the taxes are going to impact, uh, credit, worthiness over here, and can we get that next loan, and and doing the small business loans, and being able to sit down and kind of pull a team together and talk about all those different things. I should mention immigration. We have a tremendous immigration practice, right? And obviously, in the last 6 to 9 months, that's exploded for us, and we've had so many issues regarding that. 2 or 3 years ago, it was in the hospitality world, it was kind of like, hey, let's not talk about that, right? Because we don't really like to talk about that. But now it's like, hey, we have to talk about it. So, but we need to talk about it with an understanding of how it impacts all the other areas of what we do. So I've been very fortunate to have a great immigration team at Pullman, and we've been able to add that to our portfolio, which has been terrific. But again, it all comes back to, can you sit down and talk to folks about their entire operation, right? From, again, what's happening at that ground, boots on the ground level, up to the corporate levels, right? And if you can be conversant in that whole stretch from top to bottom, then I think you can provide the best service possible for your client.
Makes sense. Soup to nuts, if I may offer a cringe joke of my own.
Soup to nuts. I like it.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. So moving from that first role that I mentioned in the introduction to maybe the second one. So you're, in addition to being chair of the hospitality practice at Pullman and you're having your own legal practice there, you're also in-house chief legal officer for a hospitality group. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that role and what you do there?
Yeah, so it's the Market Hospitality Group. They are the biggest independent restaurant group in Connecticut, and they're also expanding into New York and Florida. And it's been terrific because in some ways it's a microcosm of the overall approach I like to take to our hospitality practice at Pullman, right? And Pullman's been very, very generous in letting me, do this work with the Market Hospitality Group. Be seated there about 1 or 2 days a week, and again, it really comes back to understanding the whole business, right? Understanding the client's aims for all areas of their business and the overall aims, and then kind of making sure that everything is moving in that direction. So in some ways, it's not a huge jump, and I mean, and they are a Pullman client, right? So I'm seated there 1 or 2 days a week. They're a Pullman client, but I'm deeply ingrained enough in their day-to-day operations that I can really provide advice, really closely tailored advice, right? And to make sure that, everyone's talking to everybody and that there's a real strong sense of understand where the business wants to go. So my advice is being tailored to where the business wants to go. And I think, as we talk more today, I think that, that's really where lawyers need to be in the future, especially as AI and everything, all these changes come to our industry. I think you have to really provide something more than AI can provide, right? And which is funny because we're going to talk about an AI company, but as a lawyer, you got to provide more, right? And I think that comes from understanding who your client is, how their operations work, and where your client wants to go. I don't think it can really be as transactional in some ways as it's been over the last 20, 25 years. And so
Yep.
that's what I try to do that with the Market Hospitality Group of, really understanding and tailoring my advice to what they want to do.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you touched upon a couple of topics there. We're definitely going to get into those. So moving from that to your third role, which is as a co-founder of your own startup, I believe it's called Supersonic Limited. Can you please share a little bit more about what you do in that role?
Sure, sure. And it's funny, Aniket, because it is there's a direct correlation between sort of all three of these roles, and it starts off, there's a scenario that's played itself out repeatedly over my entire career, and it's I get a call from a client, and they say that they've been sued or that they've got a complaint with a state regulatory agency filed against them for unlawful termination, discrimination based on a protected class, things like that, right? And the client calls and they're so upset. And they say, no, this guy or gal was the worst employee ever. We had to fire them. It's got nothing to do with their protected class, for example. And I say, okay, this sounds like we shouldn't have a tough time with this one. Send me over the personnel file, because at least in Connecticut, the first thing that you do is you get the personnel file and you take a look. And I'll get the personnel file. Maybe there's a job application in there, maybe not, but it's pretty much empty. There's no documentation for any of the incidents that the client's been yelling at me on the phone about for the last hour about how terrible this employee was and all the horrible things that they've done. But there's no documentation in there, period. How do we build a defense off of that, right? I've got somebody who says, look, on their face, I make a, I state a claim. I have a complaint about I was treated differently or I was fired because of X, Y, and Z. Our defense is that no, they were the worst employee ever and they did all these bad things. But again, we've got no documentation. So what? We're either going to create post-incident documentation. That's worthless. My client's going to testify. That's self-serving, right? There is no good way to fight those cases if you don't have good documentation. So we founded this company really as a way to solve that problem and as a way to use AI to help, again, managers on the floor in the moment create the right documentation so that when the issue makes its way up to the top of the corporate chain, it's done right from the beginning. Because so many times you spend money on very expensive lawyers or HR folks, and God bless all the HR people out there, but making very expensive employee handbooks and policies. But the manager on the floor doesn't know how to use those things and isn't very conversant in them. So when it comes time to make that initial incident report, that's going to go into that personnel file, and that's going to form the cornerstone of your defense to any of these claims. They do it, and they do it the right way because they're being guided by our program. So we're really trying to solve that problem of we've got these complaints, we think we did it right, but our managers didn't do it right, so now we have a huge problem.
That's fascinating. So you mentioned a couple of things in there which really stuck with me. So one is doing it in the moment, right? Because if you don't do it in the moment, the odds of
important.
The odds of getting it right, and then the odds of even doing it, perhaps, is like, yeah, I'll deal with it, tomorrow, and then tomorrow becomes next week.
You never want to do it, right? It's 11:15 at night. My wife's texting me. We have a new baby at home. I got to get home. I can't take the extra 20 minutes to write this report right now. And then the next day you forget about it. And the next day becomes next month and so on and so forth, right? So the idea was to also make it incredibly efficient. So you can do it in like 2 minutes as opposed to like 20 minutes, which also then is, hey, now you have 10 times more opportunity to do the things that you're hired for in the first place. Guest relationships, employee relationships, labor cost focus, things like that, as opposed to running around and trying to find the paperwork and then trying to remember which handbook policy was violated so you could write your report properly. It's just such a problem.
This seems to be like a truly valuable real world use case for AI. And so as people are figuring them out, I think this is easily one of the first that I've heard of that is so valuable and that leverages your domain knowledge and knowledge of real world situations.
I really appreciate that. We like to think of it that way. And that's what, we're trying to talk to other lawyers about. Hey, all the value for AI for lawyers isn't necessarily in generative AI, right? It's obviously it helps a lot and there's a lot of hype about it. But from my perspective, if lawyers can start to find tools that integrate them more closely with their clients and those clients' operations, right? And find ways to sort of connect them to their clients. I think that is where people can look to really make inroads with AI and really differentiate themselves from, because if everybody's using the same generative AI program, what's the value in that, right? Yes, it's cutting down your time and you may not have to have as many associates, which, I don't think is necessarily a good thing for the industry, but it's more of how can you do something better for your clients as opposed to just simply making your life as a lawyer easier. Because it seems like most of these tools are like, hey, you can do more work in less time as a lawyer. Okay, I mean, does that really benefit our clients in any meaningful way? Maybe their bills are a little smaller, but other than that, I don't see a huge advantage. I think a lot of lawyers are very excited about this, but it's really just going to mean that we have more time to do more work of the same kind of work. And I think a real AI revolution would be something that actually changes how our clients are able to do things kind of with us in almost a partnership, right? I think that's where I'd like to see this go.
As you were sharing all this information, Ryan, I was reflecting on the questions that I typically ask of attorneys or guests on this podcast, and they typically fall into two buckets. One is how is AI impacting what your clients are doing in whatever practice area they may be in? And then that's one sort of bucket or silo. And then a separate silo is how is AI impacting your legal practice? But I think what you just shared sort of transcends both of those questions. It's the first time actually I've thought of somebody sharing something about what they're doing that actually transcends both of those. So that's pretty cool.
Thank you.
So now with that, if you think about what do you see next for Supersonic, and then where do you think what do you think is the next frontier for the company, and then we'll talk about some of the other areas that you're in as well.
Sure. I mean, I think we're looking to solidify. We've got the product out. People are starting to test it and use it. We're getting great feedback. I'm hiring a team because God knows I can't do all this. We have a good team. We have a great CTO and CFO, and a bunch of engineers who are doing a really great job. We've got some founders who are also very, very smart. One's a lawyer and two are hospitality folks. Lee Gerson is our lawyer. He's a relatively well-known attorney in the Northeast, and the Marketplace Hospitality Group, where I'm GC, they're two of our founders. Their two owners, Eli Holly and Sam DeVellis, are two of our founders. So we have a really strong team there, and the support from Pullman Conley's obviously been fantastic. So, we've got this moment to prove that this does solve the problem that we're talking about, and then to kind of figure out, is it just a product for retail? Is it a product that law firms, I think, could start to look at and say, gee, this kind of a model, again, how can we deploy with our clients in mind in terms of what our clients do, right? So we do want to push it to this level where law firms can take a look at it and say, maybe this is something that, or something kind of look like where we want to go, where we build tools for clients, which I think is a really interesting way to not just help clients, but also, look, frankly, you're deepening your relationship with the clients, right? You're showing that you understand what they need, and you're showing that you're creative and proactive enough to do something about that need. I think that is one of the most important things a lawyer can do. It's not traditionally what lawyers do, but I think with all this technology, you have to start thinking about doing things that way. So, and then we have the usual startup goals. We want to expand and push out and, work with trade associations and insurance companies and all that fun stuff. For the moment, I'm just trying to make sure the thing works as well as it seems to. So
that's incredible. Yeah, that's a very interesting and certainly for me novel reframing of how AI can be used by attorneys for their clients to benefit their clients more directly than the bills and all of that, which is obviously valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want just one more tool, right? I've got a lot of software tools, right? Here comes one more software tool. Fine, right?
Yep. So now if we go from the promise of this particular tool and this way of thinking to the pitfalls. So you've written obviously about AI and the pitfalls that exist potentially for the hospitality industry at large. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? And so what do you advise your clients on in terms of how AI can be used by various actors against them and what they should guard against?
Sure. I think there's a couple of dangers in there. One is I had an article out recently about exempt and non-exempt employees, right? And a lot of that question is, well, how much time is your manager spending doing managerial tasks? If those tasks are then offloaded to AI, are they really a manager anymore? And it's actually really a fascinating argument, because it's like, well, if they're using AI like a tool to manage, how are they still not managers, right? But I guess depending on the sophistication of the AI platform, are they really just inputting data and then letting the AI do all the work? It's really interesting. And I think the way clients work within that framework is a, be cognizant of it, but make sure that the manager stays very engaged in the process, right? And that they're not just checked out. And I think that that's a rule for all AI usage, right? That you want to be an extension of your processes, but you don't want it to be all of your processes. Maybe in 5 or 10 years we will be there, but right now, no way. And that's when we were building Comp, one of the fun features that we have is something called Ask Kathy, and Kathy is sort of like she's like the resident advisor within the Comp ecosystem. And what her job is we have copies of the company handbook loaded in, and we have some foundational legal documents, and we also have a partnership with JD Supra. And JD Supra feeds data to our AI. And so, but it's a very closed system, right? There's the data that we as lawyers put in, there's the data that comes from the employee handbook, and then there's data from JD Supra, which is attributed and cited all the way through. So when a manager asks Kathy a question at 11:30 at night, what's our policy on this? Or what does the law in Connecticut say about meal breaks? I don't remember, right? It's not practicing law. We're very clear about that, right? But it can respond to questions about what is the right thing to do, not specific scenario questions, but what's the meal break law in Connecticut? And if you ask that question to Google or even to a regular chat, like a Claude or a Chat GPT, I've seen it pull California, right? I really don't need my manager at 11 o'clock at night misinterpreting the meal break law because they're pulling something from California they thought was Connecticut. So I think you've got to be incredibly careful about who's using AI in your organization and where the data is coming from. That's the one thing that we really come to appreciate is, garbage in, garbage out. It's kind of, but it's been said a lot, but it can't be said enough from my perspective, because when there's all of our clients want to cut us. I mean, lawyers across the board, right? Most of our clients want to go on Chat GPT first. That is their first instinct now. It's terrible because I've seen the responses that come back. So I think, yes, there's things like exempt and non-exempt, but really to be careful about where the data is coming from. And that's why Comp is so careful about how we cultivate our data. But a lot of places are not as careful. And I think it's very seductive, especially for clients. I can go on ChatGPT for free. I don't got to pay for, whatever hourly rate I'm supposed to be paying. And people want to do that. So I think we have to find ways to dissuade them and to really educate clients. Hey, yes, it's in our self-interest for you guys to call us and to use us, but can we come up with solutions that help you get that information the way that's so easily at your fingertips? Can we teach you a little bit about that and find a better way to do it?
Makes sense. Which leads me to my next question. So you've been named the Connecticut Restaurants Association's Vendor of the Year. And so that's interesting because that's an award from your client, not from other lawyers, of which there's many types of awards. So what does that tell you about, what is that recognition? First of all, congratulations for receiving that recognition. And what does that tell you about what your clients are truly looking for and value in their counsel?
That's a great question. I don't want to necessarily speak for them, but it's funny. I'll kind of back it up a second. I come from, I said, a family of lawyers. My wife's a lawyer. A lot of my close friends are lawyers. One of my founders is a lawyer. I don't really like. I mean, I say that jokingly, right? But I do think that sometimes lawyers make a mistake of being too eager to impress or network with other lawyers. And I say that on the Litigator's Edge podcast. So I don't obviously think that across the board, but I think sometimes we can get a little carried away with proving ourselves to our peers, right? It is a competitive industry. It's a competitive business. We all want to be doing the best that we can, and we all want recognition from our peers. But I've learned over the years that recognition from your clients feels a lot better because, again, we're doing this for our clients and to serve our clients. And so, even if you're taking a path that is less, I don't want to say less glamorous, but, maybe you're not winning all the legal accolades or you're not serving on this board or that board. If you're serving your clients, I think that might be time better spent. I think and there's a real going all the way back to when I'm sort of thrown to the wolves with clients in the very beginning of my career. A lot of other young attorneys I know were going to more bar association events, bar galas, things like that, right? And those are fun. Like, don't I went to one last week for UConn alumni, and it was a terrific event. But I think overall, you do want to be careful about that seduction of trying to impress all your peers, because ultimately, I think the respect from your clients is the key to longevity in this practice.
That that's so well articulated, Ryan. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, because I mean, and I would imagine you see that with your entrepreneur hat on as well, right? Because I would imagine that, while it may be nice, and I'll speak a little bit from my own experiences as a startup founder also, is like there's always the siren song of the tech crunch or the other startup media landscape and
Right.
all of
Oh
that.
yeah.
It's very glamorous, quote unquote, to be a part of that, but it's far more satisfying to receive accolades from your customers, from your clients, depending on whether it's a company or your law firm. So no, thank you for sharing
No,
that.
thank you. Yeah.
So this has been a great and truly thought-provoking conversation, Ryan. So I really do appreciate it. So just a couple of quick questions to tie it all. So if you could go back and give advice to yourself or to a young attorney today who's looking out from law school, graduating soon, and sort of thinking about, hey, I want to develop a specialization in a particular industry. I want to learn all about it, and then I want to immerse myself and potentially even branch out in the ways that you so successfully have. What advice would you give them? What should they be thinking?
I think start as soon as possible. Start as soon as possible, right? If that means, so for instance, hospitality. I wish I had worked in hospitality during law school. I regret not, and then by that I mean go be a server or go wash dishes, right? Just based on hospitality, because again, I think that's so important to the understanding of the industry. And law school is great, we're going to seminars and lectures and parties, but maybe there would have been some time there that I could have spent. Again, it doesn't matter which industry it is, if you can do a little bit of grunt work in that industry when you're young, I think you can come into the practice with just more experience and appreciation for the area that you want to work in, and you're more conversant. You're able to actually talk the talk of the industry, right? And there's nothing that makes lawyers sound worse when they try to use industry jargon or look like they know what they're talking about, and they use the wrong words, or it comes off like you're just trying to get in the way of something you don't really understand. And that's embarrassing, right? So I think the real nitty gritty experience, so you can communicate that to the people that you want to represent down the road, is so important.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And final question for you, Ryan. Is there a question that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No, I mean, this was fantastic, right? I'd love to have like a great answer here, but I think that I just say if people haven't maybe heard of Pullman Comley, I just say we've been acknowledged as one of the best places to work in Connecticut, and we've been recognized as a regional powerhouse by Law 360. Pullman's doing some really cool cutting edge things, and I would encourage folks who maybe aren't familiar with Pullman to go and check them out, and learn about some of the things that we're doing over here.
Well, Ryan, this has been truly, as I mentioned, a thought-provoking conversation. You opened up some new perspectives. Certainly for me, I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will as well. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much for having me, and I hope I can come back soon.
The Litigator's Edge podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.